Benjamin, Jan, he's shaking right now, and this could get out of hand if he doesn't stop the bleeding.
Yeah, all of a sudden it's a 4-point gap. That's quite hefty. After the break, it was only 2 points. I thought Jan was still having a very good chance. He also had chances in that black game in the Petrov, but we saw how he took on d4 a little bit too quickly. And again, he's just losing games in an unnecessary manner, and Magnus is just more consistent.
He is indeed, and we see this game, it looks very solid, but we have a Sicilian defense, so it was a Najdorf, then it turns into a dragon-like position, and black has no weaknesses. White, similarly, doesn't really have any weaknesses, but white has more control. So what's black's plan in a position like this?
It's a good question. I mean, I also struggle sometimes in these positions, like what is the plan? He goes knight e5 to c4. All right, so white can stop that with b3, but I guess then queen c7 is annoying, attacking the knight on c3. So let's see how Magnus is going to deal with this. He can also allow knight c4. It's really not a big deal, but then black gets the rook to c4. He can double and even triple on a c-file. So I guess that's what Jan is going for right here.
Yeah, knight c4, it does get black the bishop pair, but once you swap, there's also these e5 tactics that you have to be worried about. So Jonathan puts his bishop on c6, but then the question is, why is the knight on e5? The knight doesn't seem like it's really doing all that much there if it can't jump forward anymore.
Exactly. f3, nice move by Magnus, solidifying the pawn on e4. Now Magnus wants to go a5, create a clamp on the queen side. His bishop can always slide into b6 at the right moment. And look at this, he's played f4 and he's given Jan a bunch of weaknesses on the king side. All of a sudden this looks really good for white.
Yeah, maybe the claim is that there's some counterplay. If you go after the h5 pawn, it takes a bit of time. It's kind of got some Spassky Fischer vibes to it, but the knight came back to d4 so quickly, going after the bishop. Knight f5, going after the other bishop, looks very worrisome for the black king. Not a big fan of this position for Jan.
Me neither. Knight c5 was played, attacking the pawn on e4. So Magnus straight on c6 and now plays e5, taking advantage of the pin along the d-file. You cannot take that pawn. At some point, maybe Magnus can take queen c8. Maybe now knight d5, threatening a deadly fork, which is why Jan plays rook e8.
Wow, this is hanging on by a thread for Jan Nepomniachtchi, but his position, even though his double isolate h-pawns look bad, I think he has good activity. The queen and rook on the c-file. At some point, you have to watch out for your c2 pawn being loose. You can't push the c-pawn because knight b3 tactics. If you take on d6, the bishop on g7 is now out in the open. Suddenly, I believe a little bit more in Jan's position.
Exactly. Yeah, this queen can also slide into f5, defending the king side a little bit. Magnus does not have a knockout here. In case he takes on d6, Jan should not, although maybe he can even recapture with the rook, because knight takes c7, there's rook takes, and at the end of it all, the bishop on e3 is hanging. So I don't know what Magnus should do here, and look at the clock, Robert. All of a sudden, he's down a minute.
And this makes sense. This time management for Jan is paying off. It's a complicated position. I think that black could be better in a few turns. The white king, even though it looks safe, some of those dark squares in front of it are very loose. And so Magnus takes the knight on c5, and I would take with the rook on c5, because if you took with the pawn, then the bishop on g7 was locked in. Now that bishop, it slices across the diagonal and has some play.
Right, so he takes on d6 and forces Jan to recapture the pawn. Jan has a very ugly structure here. He's got these isolated pawns all over the board, but his rook is active, his queen is active, his bishop is open as well, so he might not be doing too bad here. Rook e1, nice move by Magnus though, reinforcing the threat of knight e7 check.
And giving up the b2 pawn, but he doesn't care about that pawn. Or maybe he does, the way he just put his hand up. He's maybe recognizing that bishop takes b2 is a possibility because that rook on a1 is under attack. And after rook to b1, is there some kind of swap on e1 and bishop c3? I'm not really sure there.
Maybe, no, bishop c3 right away loses due to rook takes c8 and knight takes c3. So I wonder what exactly Jan could do there. Maybe you can take on c2 instead of... No, there's rook takes c8 again. I don't know. He plays king h8, but that looks really passive. Now you just hand Magnus a better position.
And it's clear bishop takes b2 was available, both by Magnus's body language and the question mark given to king h8. Not an easy move to play, to remove your only defender of your king to the other side of the board, but Magnus Carlsen trades rooks, now puts his pawn on c3, and strategically, Benjamin, I think we can say that white is winning strategically, but there are some holes in white's king side on the dark squares, and it's not easy to break through when you have to worry about your own king.
Exactly. He goes queen d3, slowly but surely improving the position. However, now he can no longer go rook d1, queen c6, and knight e3. Jan's pieces are becoming a bit more active, but overall it looks great for Magnus. Black has this ugly pawn structure with isolated pawns in the center, and on the king side, this knight can always move to f5, which is why Jan played queen at d7. That being said, though, it's not that easy to bring this rook in, as if you go rook e1, you're going to hang this a-pawn.
And that's why I went a5, but it gave black the b5 square. Rook takes b4.
Rook takes
b4.
That's just
and you see Magnus, he recognized it. As soon as he played the move, he was like, what am I thinking?
Wait, this one could completely turn around. All of a sudden, Jan is up a pawn. These pawns are on dark squares. Queen e6, a nice move, offering the trade of queens. Magnus doesn't mind the trade of queens, but he wants to trade on his terms. Bishop c3, I guess takes is not good because of bishop d4.
Ooh, that's a nasty looking pin. White maybe hanging on by a thread here. And look at the clock, by the way. Magnus down to 15 seconds to Jan's minute plus.
Yo, what do you do here? What do you do? Again, you don't want to trade. He plays f5. Okay, Jan can trade. He can also just move the queen, as now the dark squares have been weakened even more.
I would go queen e7. Defend all your pawns. The b4 pawn is loose. There are pins. The queen h4 check is available to go after that b4 pawn. He plays queen f6, but why would you give up the b7 pawn?
What was that? He gives a b7 and a6. Magnus goes king f3. I don't know what Jan has done here. Magnus seems to be completely fine.
And king f3, maybe not the most precise, but in time trouble, looks like a good move. And if you take on e3, king takes e3, that looks like we should be heading towards drawville, because the white king will probably see tons of checks and not be able to successfully escape.
Yeah, black can pick up some pawns, maybe the pawn on f5, but white should always have sufficient counterplay, as they're going to get a passer on the queen side. So I don't think there's anything more here than a draw for Jan. I mean, slightly disappointing for Magnus. He was in control for most of the game, but I think if you're Jan, you might be kicking yourself, as this might have been an opportunity to close the gap a little bit.
Jan went for a win with d5. The engine didn't love it, but he is maybe just able to force a draw at this stage with checking on the dark squares. But Magnus, he's the only one who can win this position.
Okay, queen takes b4. There goes the pawn with check, though. This one should be a draw. I don't see a way for Magnus to get out. That being said, wait. There's no good check now. So Jan goes king g7, queen b6, check. d4. Wait, this is still a 3 years old game.
Yeah, whose pawn is better? Both are passed. Queen e5 is a very nice move.
Okay, you hang the pawn with check. You cannot take on d4, so it goes king. There goes a5. They're taking a5. And you're playing for 2 results now.
Queen trade, because black's pawn structure is bad. There's going to be a sundial, but the king stays in touch with the queen. Benjamin, as long as the queen stays on d5, I have a hard time imagining white losing this game.
Okay, queen h7. He could have taken on h5, as g2 was not hanging because of queen takes f7. This one should be a draw because black's pawn structure is so bad.
Yeah, queen f5, normally up a pawn in endgame, should lead to a win, but not with double isolated h-pawns like this. And now the queen trade is offered. Ooh, good try though by Jan, and now it should be an easy draw.
Yeah, this one is an easy draw. If black had doubled f-pawns, there would have still been a chance, but doubled h-pawns, I think there's nothing you can do here. The king f5, the king just steps back. And again, if you... Oh, yeah, there's nothing to be done here.
If they're double f-pawns, you would have that f3 move. Instead,